The silence of the house was a language I had learned to speak fluently. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of conversations I was not part of plans made in hushed tones in rooms I had just left. That evening, the silence was particularly articulate. My son David and his wife Clara were in the kitchen, their voices a low murmur, the conspiratorial sound of people who believe they are alone. I was in my armchair in the living room, a book open on my lap, its words as motionless as the air around me. I wasn't meant to hear. That was part of the arrangement. I was the fixture, the quiet grandfather who occupied the chair by the window, a benign presence as inanimate as the grandfather clock in the hall. They were talking about Portugal, about the flights they'd booked, the villa with a pool, the day trips to see the cliffs. Their excitement was a bright, sharp thing, a shard of glass in the muffled quiet of my life. I heard my granddaughter Maya's name and my grandson Leo's. I did not hear my own. I kept my eyes on the page, my breathing even. To react would be to admit I had been listening, and that was not my role. My role was to be oblivious, to be grateful for the roof over my head and the meals placed before me. Later, after they had gone to bed, their laughter echoing up the stairs, a sound from a world I could only observe, I saw the folder on the hall table. A slim, blue folder with the logo of a travel agency. It was careless of them, but then, why would they need to be careful? I was just Arthur. I picked it up. My hands, I noticed, were steady. Inside were the flight confirmations, the hotel vouchers, the rental car agreement. 4 names: David, Clara, Maya, Leo, and tucked into a side pocket, a single sheet of paper, folded in half. My name was at the top. Dad's list. It was Clara's brisk, efficient handwriting. Water the ficus on Tuesdays. Bring in the mail. Security system code is 4821, a reminder about the recycling schedule. I stood there in the dim hallway, the blue folder in my hand, and felt a quiet click inside me. Like a lock I hadn't known was there had just been turned. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound and hollow clarity. The list wasn't an oversight. It was an assignment. I was not a person to be invited, but a function to be managed. The caretaker, the house sitter. I had been relegated to the status of a household appliance, one they expected to work reliably in their absence. I walked into the kitchen, the scene of their recent, happy plotting. I did not turn on the main light, preferring the small amber glow from the lamp over the stove. The room smelled faintly of the garlic and wine from their dinner. I went through the motions, the familiar ritual that had become my only true solace. I measured the coffee beans, the small dark pellets rattling into the grinder. The whirring shriek of the machine was a satisfying violence in the quiet house. I boiled the water, poured it over the grounds, and watched the dark, fragrant liquid drip into the glass carafe. The aroma filled the kitchen, a smell of earth and smoke and bitterness. It was the only thing in this house that felt entirely mine. With the warm mug cradled in my hands, I sat at the kitchen table. The list lay beside me. My hands were trembling now, a fine, almost invisible tremor. I thought of my wife, Eleanor. She would never have allowed this. She was the one who saw me. To her, I was not a function. I was her Arthur. Since she'd gone, the color had slowly drained from my life, leaving me in these shades of gray, muted and obedient. I had let it happen. I had folded myself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit the spaces they left for me, until I was barely there at all. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it in the dishwasher. Then I walked to the study, sat down at the heavy oak desk, and opened David's laptop. I knew the password. It was Maya's birthday. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the booking confirmation in his email. There it was. Lisbon. 10 days. A beautiful mirage of a life I was not invited to. I looked at the options on the airline's website. Manage booking. I clicked it. Flight cancellation. Hotel cancellation. Car rental cancellation. A series of small, decisive clicks. A box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this non-refundable booking? It asked. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. Oh, I was sure. I clicked. Confirm. The screen refreshed. Your booking has been successfully canceled. A digital guillotine. A quiet, bloodless coup. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The house was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was my silence. I had taken it back. I thought about my life, a long ribbon of memories unreeling in the dark. My career as an architect, the buildings I had designed that would outlive me, the feel of Eleanor's hand in mine, the weight of a newborn David in my arms. When had I stopped being that man? When had I become this ghost, haunting the edges of my own family's life? It hadn't happened all at once. It was a slow, creeping erosion. 1,000 tiny concessions. 1,000 moments of choosing silence over conflict. I had collaborated in my own vanishing. The first hint of dawn was staining the edges of the window panes. I went to my room. I opened my closet and looked past the sensible beige and gray sweaters Clara bought for me at Christmas. In the very back, shrouded in a plastic garment bag, was a suit. Charcoal gray, Italian wool. I had bought it with Eleanor for our 30th anniversary. I hadn't worn it since her funeral. I took it out. Beside it, in a small wooden box, was a collection of silk ties. I chose a deep burgundy one. I took out my old leather suitcase. It smelled of dust and cedar. I packed the suit, the tie, a few good shirts, my worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. My passport was in the desk drawer, valid for another 3 years. My bank card was in my wallet. I had my own account, a pension, the money Eleanor and I had saved for a trip we never took. A trip to see the Northern Lights. We ran out of time. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. A tired, old man. But for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. A spark. I did not write a note. The canceled booking would be my note. My list of instructions for them. Figure it out. I walked through the silent house, my small suitcase in hand. At the front door, I paused. I could hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the house settling. These were the sounds of my life, the cage I had built for myself. I turned the knob, stepped out into the cool, pre-dawn air, and closed the door quietly behind me. I did not look back. The air in Lisbon was a physical presence. It was warm and soft, and carried the scent of the sea mixed with exhaust fumes and roasting coffee. It was a shock to the system after the sterile, recycled air of the airplane and the filtered, climate-controlled atmosphere of my son's house. I stood on the pavement outside the airport, my small case at my feet, and just breathed. The light was different here, a pale golden wash that seemed to soften the edges of everything. The sounds were a chaotic symphony, the rattle of suitcase wheels on tile, the musical cadence of a language I didn't understand, the impatient honking of taxi horns. It was overwhelming, and it made me feel intensely, terrifyingly alive. My hotel was a small, unassuming place in the Alfama district, with a wrought iron balcony overlooking a steep, narrow street. My room was simple: a bed, a small wooden desk, a window that opened onto the cacophony of the city. I didn't unpack. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the life below. Trams groaned their way up the hill, their bells clanging. A woman shouted a greeting from one balcony to another. The smell of grilled sardines drifted up from a nearby restaurant. And as I sat there, the full weight of what I had done and what had been done to me finally descended. There were no tears. It was a grief too old and too deep for that. It was a hollow ache in my chest, a quiet reckoning with a lifetime of being secondary. The unwanted guest at my own family's table. The reliable, invisible man. I had loved them so much, and my reward was to be deemed unworthy of an airline ticket, to be reduced to a list of chores. The pain of it was clean and sharp. I didn't try to push it away. I let it sit with me, in that sunlit room in a foreign city. It was a necessary pain, the kind that cauterizes a wound. I sat there for hours until the golden light faded to indigo, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the cobblestones. I was alone, but for the first time in a very long time, I was not lonely. The next morning, I began to walk. I had no map, no destination. I left the tourist-clogged arteries and plunged into the labyrinth of side streets. I found hidden courtyards where laundry flapped like prayer flags between buildings. I discovered tiny, tiled chapels and bookstores that smelled of aging paper and dust. I bought a warm pastel de nata from a bakery and ate it on a stone bench in a small square, watching old men play cards. I was an observer, adrift in the current of the city, and it was liberating. No one knew me here. No one had any expectations of me. I was not dad or grandpa. I was simply a man walking through a city. In a small antique shop, I found a beautiful, dark leather watch band. I bought it and had the shopkeeper fit it to the old Omega watch Eleanor had given me for my 40th birthday. The original strap had worn out years ago. Sliding the restored watch onto my wrist was a small, significant act. It felt like reclaiming a piece of my own history, a time when I was seen and valued. I would sit at a cafe for an hour, nursing a single small coffee, just watching the world flow past me. I started to notice things again. The intricate patterns of the tiles on the buildings, the way the light fell across a public garden, the weary grace of an old woman carrying her shopping up a steep hill. My senses, dulled by years of routine and invisibility, were slowly waking up. One evening, seeking refuge from a sudden downpour, I ducked into a small, dimly lit restaurant. The air was thick with the smell of wine and grilled fish, and from a corner, the mournful sound of a Portuguese guitar accompanied a woman's powerful, sorrowful voice. Fado. I found a small table in the back. A man sitting alone at the next table nodded to me. He was about my age, with a weathered face and intelligent, amused eyes. He was dressed well, in a linen jacket, and had an air of easy confidence. "First time hearing Fado?" he asked, his English crisp and clear. I admitted it was. "It's the sound of a broken heart," he said with a wry smile. "But a beautiful one, don't you think?" We introduced ourselves. His name was Julian. He was a retired history professor from Cambridge, traveling alone. He had a way of asking questions that were direct without being intrusive. He asked what brought me to Lisbon, and for some reason, I found myself telling him. Not the whole raw story, but a polished, edited version. My family had travel plans that changed, I said. I decided to come on my own. Julian listened, his gaze steady. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. When I finished, he took a sip of his wine and looked at me for a long moment. "Good for you," he said simply. A man has to draw a line in the sand somewhere. Otherwise, he disappears. The words landed with the force of a revelation. He saw it. He understood. It wasn't just my own self-pitying narrative. Someone else, a stranger, recognized the act for what it was, a necessary act of self-preservation. It was the most profound validation I had ever received. We talked for hours about books, history, the follies of our children, the strange landscape of growing old. I felt a part of myself I thought was long dead stir to life. The man who could hold a conversation, who had opinions, who could make a stranger laugh. Julian was heading north to Porto in a few days. "The train ride along the coast is spectacular," he said. "You should come." It was an invitation, not a demand, an offering. And on an impulse I hadn't felt in 30 years, I said, "Yes, I think I will." That night, back in my hotel room, my phone buzzed. I had kept it on silent, in a drawer. I fished it out. A single text message from David. It had been sent that morning. "Dad, where are the spare garage door openers? Can't find them anywhere." I stared at the screen, the sheer, breathtaking obliviousness of it. They had discovered the canceled flights. They must be in a state of chaos, of anger, of confusion, and his first instinct was to ask me about a garage door opener. The triviality of it was almost comical. I was a continent away, in the middle of a silent rebellion for my own soul, and he wanted to know about a small plastic remote. I deleted the message and turned the phone off. The line in the sand, I thought. Julian was right. The journey to Porto with Julian was a revelation. We sat in a comfortable carriage, the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean flashing blue and silver beside the tracks. We didn't talk the whole time. We were comfortable in the shared silence, reading or just watching the landscape unspool. It was a companionship of equals, a concept that had become foreign to me. In Porto, we found rooms in a guest house overlooking the Douro River, the city's ancient, colorful houses stacked precariously on the steep hills. Julian was an excellent traveling companion. He had an insatiable curiosity and a refusal to be treated like an old man. He insisted on walking everywhere, climbing the city's notoriously steep streets, exploring the wine cellars, lingering in markets. I found myself keeping pace, my body feeling stronger, more capable than it had in years. One afternoon, as we were having a glass of port on a riverside terrace, Julian looked at me. "You know, Arthur," he said, "you sit up straighter than when I first met you in Lisbon. Less like you're waiting for a blow." I hadn't noticed it myself, but he was right. I felt less folded in on myself, less apologetic for the space I occupied. The messages from home, when I occasionally turned on my phone, had escalated in tone. First confusion, then a feigned, frantic worry. And "Dad, please call us. We're worried sick." Then, inevitably, the anger and accusation. A long, rambling text from Clara about how selfish I was being, how I had ruined the children's holiday, how disappointed Eleanor would be in me. I read it, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not guilt, not anger, just a profound and sad distance. Their drama felt like a badly written play I was no longer required to act in. I turned the phone off again. The silence was a balm. A week into our time in Porto, Julian came down with a bad cold. He was feverish and weak, confined to his bed. I found myself slipping into a familiar role, but the context was entirely different. I made him tea. I went to the pharmacy and, with a combination of gestures and a translation app, managed to buy medicine. I brought him soup from a local cafe. It was the role of a caretaker, the one I had been assigned at home. But this was not an obligation. It was a choice. It was an act of friendship, freely given and gratefully received. "You're a good man, Arthur," Julian rasped from his pillow. And I realized that caregiving, when born of connection instead of duty, was not a burden. It was an affirmation. A letter arrived at the guest house, forwarded from my hotel in Lisbon. The postmark was from home. It was from Clara. Her handwriting, usually so neat, was jagged and angry. It was a litany of her grievances. How much stress I had caused. How difficult it had been to explain my absence to the children. How much money they had lost on the non-refundable bookings. It was all about her. About them. There was not a single sentence of introspection. Not a flicker of acknowledgement of what they had done. It was the letter of a person who could not see beyond the borders of her own needs. I read it once, then tore it into small pieces and let them flutter into the wastebasket. But later that day, an email was waiting for me in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Grandpa." It was from Maya. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked it open. "Grandpa," it read, "Mom and Dad are going crazy." But I wanted to say, "I think I get it. What they did, talking about the trip and just leaving you a list. It was awful." I tried to say something, but they didn't listen. "I'm sorry. I hope you're somewhere amazing and having the best time. You deserve it. Tell me everything when you get back. Love, Maya." I read the email 3 times. A warmth spread through my chest, a feeling so potent it almost brought me to tears. She saw me. The youngest of them all, she was the one who truly saw me. Her email was a bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding, a lifeline. It gave me the final piece of strength I needed. I picked up my phone, turned it on, and found David's number. I didn't call. I opened the voicemail function and pressed record. My voice when I spoke was calm and steady. There was no anger in it, only a quiet, unshakable resolve. "David," I began, "I'm not going to apologize for the inconvenience I've caused you. I am in Portugal, and I am safe. I needed to go somewhere I could feel like a person again, not just a function in your lives. The arrangement we had, the silent, invisible man in the corner, that's over. I love you all, but when I come home, things will be different. I will be different. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to return." I ended the message and sent it, a declaration of independence, sent across the ether, a manifesto for a new life. That evening, Julian was feeling much better. To celebrate, we went to a tiny, cluttered record shop he'd discovered. As I browsed the dusty stacks, my fingers brushed against a familiar album cover. It was Amalia Rodriguez, the great fado singer, an album Eleanor and I had bought on a long-ago holiday. I purchased the record. Back at the guest house, Julian had a small, portable record player. I placed the vinyl on the turntable. The first notes, the mournful, intricate dance of the guitars, filled the room. I closed my eyes. I didn't dance. I didn't even move. I just stood in the middle of the room and let the music wash over me, a wave of memory and sorrow and a strange, quiet joy. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure, entirely for myself. A few days passed. I didn't check my phone. I felt a sense of peace, of completion. Then, one morning, a text message came through. It was from David. It was short, stripped of all the usual drama. "Dad, I'm sorry. I get it now. We all are. Come home when you're ready." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a beginning. It was an acknowledgement. Later that day, another came, from a number I recognized as Clara's. "Arthur, I was wrong. I am so very sorry for how I treated you. That one I knew had been harder to write. It was the crack in the dam. I booked a flight home for the following week. Saying goodbye to Julian was unexpectedly difficult. We promised to write, to perhaps meet in another city someday. Don't you dare let them fold you back up, Arthur, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I promised I wouldn't. Walking back into the house was a strange experience. It was physically the same furniture, the same smell of lemon polish and old books. But my perception of it had been irrevocably altered. I no longer felt like a guest. I walked in as if I owned the place because I did, not just legally, but spiritually. Maya was the first one I saw. She ran to me, her arms wrapping around me in a fierce hug. "Grandpa," she whispered, "you were so cool." We talked for over an hour. I showed her my photographs of Lisbon's tiled streets, of the view over the Douro in Porto. She didn't look at them as a grandchild looks at a grandparent's boring holiday snaps. She looked at them as if she were seeing a man she had never known before, an adventurer. Our bond, once quiet and affectionate, was now forged in a new, profound understanding. The first family dinner was a quiet, awkward affair. David and Clara were hesitant, watchful. They treated me with a new, fragile deference. They asked me about my trip, and they actually listened to the answers. No one asked me to pass the salt or clear the plates. The power dynamic had shifted, not because of any grand confrontation, but because of my absence. I had demonstrated, in the clearest possible terms, that my presence was a choice, not a given. Later that night, I sat in my study. The house was quiet. I had bought a new leather-bound notebook in Porto. I opened it to the first page. For a long time, I just looked at the blank, cream-colored paper. Then I picked up my pen and wrote. "Sometimes," I wrote, "you have to leave everything you know to find your way back to yourself. You have to become a stranger in a strange land to remember who you are when you are at home." The future was unwritten. The relationships with my son and his wife were a construction site. The old structure demolished, the new foundations still setting, but it was a hopeful uncertainty. I was no longer a ghost. I was Arthur, and I was finally home.